ESPN just told the shocking truth as to why Sandy Brondello was let go by the New York Liberty.
When ESPN dropped the bombshell about Sandy Brondello's exit from the New York Liberty, the news hit harder than anyone expected. Here was a coach who had guided the Liberty to back-to-back finals appearances, then captured the championship, only to be pushed out the door as if all of that never happened. Fans were left stunned, asking how success could possibly equal failure. But ESPN's report peeled back the curtain and revealed something darker at play.
But let's head on over to ESPN to see what Alexa had to say.
For a lot of folks this morning, a year removed from winning the title, what exactly led to the parting of ways between the Liberty and Sandy Brondello here?
Well, Malika, I know you guys talk about this a lot in the NBA and in other sports, but it was really championship or bust for New York and for Sandy Brondello. And in fact, if they hadn't won the championship last year, we might have been having this conversation a year ago.
This wasn't just about wins and losses. It was about a ruthless standard set by Liberty ownership, one that demanded absolute perfection no matter the cost. And when Becky Hammon herself spoke out against the decision, it confirmed what many suspected. There was a dirty trick behind this firing. The real story wasn't about basketball strategy. It was about power, politics, and the dangerous game being played inside the WNBA.
Now, we know Alexa from ESPN tweeted out earlier today that Sandy Brondello was let go. And the Indiana Fever, and the New York Liberty released the article as well, stating that they had let her go.
The firing of Sandy Brondello from the New York Liberty wasn't just another coaching change. It was a shockwave that rattled the WNBA to its core. Here was a coach who had done everything a franchise could possibly ask for, guided her team to consecutive finals appearances, engineered a roster filled with superstars, and finally delivered the championship that New York fans had been dreaming about. And yet, just a year removed from lifting the trophy, she was suddenly shown the door.
That I believe there could be some drama somewhere down the line between front office and Sandy. That's the only way this makes sense. Because prior to her winning last year, she had went to the WNBA championship the year before that as well. So you mean to tell me you're going to fire a coach for going to the WNBA championship 2 times in a row? She have won more games than any other coach in franchise history. And she simply only lost in the playoffs because of injuries. Like, there was nothing from her to cause the loss that Liberty took.
To outsiders, it looked almost unthinkable. How do you justify removing the winningest coach in franchise history at the peak of her success? The news first broke through ESPN's reporting, with journalist Alexa Philippou confirming what many could hardly believe. The Liberty weren't simply making a subtle shift in direction. They had cut ties with the architect of their recent dominance. Her record spoke volumes in her final 3 seasons. Brondello's Liberty racked up a stunning win-loss tally that outpaced every coach who came before her. She didn't lose the locker room, she didn't collapse under pressure, and she didn't sabotage her team with bad decisions. If anything, the only obstacle she ever faced was injuries to key players at critical moments, something no coach can fully control.
That is so crazy. They fired this lady for losing in the playoffs when it wasn't even her fault that they lost. I just cannot get over that, bro.
Fans flooded social media with disbelief. The reaction was universal: confusion, frustration, and anger at how someone could be dismissed after bringing so much success. Many pointed out that in most sports, a championship cements a coach's security. It buys them time, prestige, and credibility. In New York's case, it appeared to have done the opposite.
But it is the end of an era for sure for Brondello and New York.
Yeah, the Liberty said that the search for their next head coach, it is getting underway immediately.
Brondello's championship win only raised the bar so high that anything less than repeating the feat became unacceptable in the eyes of ownership. It was championship or bust, a cruel ultimatum that left no room for context, no patience for reality, and no recognition for what had been accomplished. Even players seemed blindsided by the move. Breena Stewart had made it clear in post-game comments after their playoff exit that the team stood behind Brondello. That show of support, however, did nothing to sway the front office's decision. Instead, the firing felt calculated, almost as if management had been waiting for the smallest excuse to move on. ESPN's coverage hinted at this, noting that Brondello could have been dismissed the year before if not for winning the championship.
I am sorry. For the life of me, I will not understand how you get fired for losing in the playoffs when it wasn't even your fault that you lost.
That revelation stunned fans further, suggesting the decision wasn't based on basketball alone, but rather on an internal agenda that had been brewing for some time. In the end, Brondello's sudden fall wasn't just about a coaching change, it symbolized something bigger, a franchise willing to sacrifice stability, loyalty, and history for a vision only they seemed to believe in. And while the headlines focused on her firing, the real intrigue was only just beginning. Because if success wasn't enough to save her job, what exactly was the Liberty chasing behind closed doors?
Say potential New York Liberty coaching candidates after firing Sandy Brondello: Becky Hammon and Don Staley. I don't see Don Staley coming to the W. I really don't. I don't think they have enough money for Don Staley. Don Staley is a different class of coach. I can definitely see Don Staley going to the NBA, though. I can see Don Staley definitely going to the NBA. I cannot see her coming to the W. It's just not enough money for her.
When ESPN peeled back the curtain on the Liberty's decision, the phrase that stood out like a lightning bolt was championship or bust. According to reporter Alexa Phillips, ownership in New York had set a bar so high that anything short of another title defense would be seen as failure. In other words, Brondello could deliver a dominant season, pile up wins, and still be judged as falling short if the team didn't finish on top. It wasn't enough to compete at the highest level. The mandate was absolute perfection. For fans and analysts, this explanation was both shocking and frustrating. In most sports leagues, winning a championship earns a coach years of credibility. It buys patience, it proves their methods work, and it usually cements their place in franchise history. But in New York, that same accomplishment seemed to erase any margin for error. Instead of stability, the Liberty doubled down on pressure. Even the smallest slip, like injuries derailing a playoff run, became grounds for termination. That ruthless expectation was the very definition of championship or bust. This mindset reflects more than ambition. It reveals the unique pressure of the New York market. The Liberty have long operated in the shadow of New York's other professional teams, from the Knicks to the Yankees. In that city, winning is never enough. Dynasties are demanded. Ownership seemed determined to treat the Liberty in the same mold, positioning them not just as champions, but as a global brand that had to dominate every single season. Brondello, despite her historic success, was sacrificed to that image. But ESPN's reporting hinted at something even deeper. Sources suggested that Brondello's firing wasn't only about results on the court, but about optics and control. Ownership wanted to send a message that no one was untouchable, not even the coach who had delivered their first title. By enforcing the championship or bust standard so aggressively, they shifted the spotlight away from themselves and onto the coaching staff. It was a calculated move that created the appearance of accountability, while disguising the instability within the front office. What made the situation even more telling was Becky Hammon's response. When asked about Brondello's firing, Hammon didn't hide her feelings. She openly called it a move she didn't agree with, emphasizing that Sandy was one of the rare leaders who combined elite basketball strategy with genuine human connection. Hammon's defense underscored the absurdity of the championship or bust narrative. Coaches themselves were recognizing that the Liberty had crossed a line. Between high standards and outright unfairness, for the WNBA as a whole, ESPN's revelation carried serious implications. If a coach with Brondello's track record could be discarded under such impossible terms, what did that mean for the future of coaching in the league? Would top candidates even want to step into jobs where excellence wasn't enough? The Liberty may have wanted to project strength, but ESPN's spotlight exposed a franchise willing to bend reality to justify a decision. That made little sense, and if this is how management treated a championship-winning coach, what did it mean for the players tied to short-term contracts? That's where the story grew even more complicated. While Sandy Brondello's firing made headlines on its own, the real storm may be brewing in the locker room. ESPN's report didn't just highlight the championship or bust standard, it also pointed to a looming contract crisis that could tear the Liberty apart from within. Several of the team's biggest stars, including Breanna Stewart, Sabrina Ionescu, and other high-profile names were playing under short-term deals. For ownership, that meant every offseason was a game of roulette, and when you gamble with your stars, the fallout can be devastating. Breena Stewart's situation is particularly telling. She signed a one-year deal, a decision that gave her flexibility but also kept the Liberty on edge. Stewart had openly praised Brondello and made it clear after their playoff exit that the locker room stood behind their coach. Removing her so abruptly sends a chilling message to Stewart and others. Loyalty doesn't go both ways. If management is willing to fire a coach fresh off a championship run, what does that say about their commitment to the players? That question is at the heart of the growing tension. Players today aren't just athletes. They're brands, icons, and business investments in their own right. They expect stability from the organizations they represent. If ownership appears reckless, players have every reason to consider jumping ship. For Stewart, whose presence immediately elevates any franchise, the Liberty's decision could push her to weigh her options. And with multiple teams lining up for her services, including expansion franchises, New York might have created an opening they'll regret. Sabrina Ionescu's situation adds another layer of intrigue. She has been marketed as the face of the Liberty, a rising star who can attract fans and sell out arenas. But what happens if she sees her championship-winning coach ousted without warning? The instability could push her to wonder if the Liberty are truly building for her, or if she too is expendable in the ownership's eyes. A fractured locker room doesn't just affect morale, it directly impacts whether stars are willing to recommit long-term. ESPN's analysis hinted at this domino effect. Brondello's dismissal wasn't just about a coach. It was about setting the stage for contract negotiations. By moving on from her, the Liberty may be trying to reset expectations with their roster, signaling that no one, not coaches, not even MVP-level players, is safe from scrutiny. It's a dangerous game of power where ownership asserts control, but risks losing everything in the process. The gamble of short-term contracts is supposed to give players leverage, but it cuts both ways. If Stewart and others decide the Liberty are no longer trustworthy, they can walk. That would dismantle the very super team management worked so hard to build. And that's the irony. In firing the Liberty may have triggered the very collapse they were desperate to avoid. The players' futures now hang in the balance, and the spotlight is firmly on Liberty ownership. But it's not just players who noticed the move. Becky Hammon herself had something to say, and her words only added more fuel to the fire. When the Liberty announced Sandy Brondello's firing, the backlash wasn't limited to fans or analysts. One of the most respected voices in the game, Becky Hammon, stepped forward and openly challenged the decision. Hammon, who has built her own reputation as both a trailblazer and a championship coach with the Las Vegas Aces, didn't sugarcoat her response. She made it clear she did not agree with the move, praising Brondello not just as a coach, but as a person. A combination, she said, was incredibly rare in professional sports. That distinction is important. Hammon wasn't only defending Brondello's basketball resume, which speaks for itself, but also highlighting her character. In a league where trust between coaches and players is everything, Brondello had managed to earn respect on both fronts. Hammon's remarks struck a chord because they came from someone who knows exactly what it takes to balance egos, strategize under pressure, and still connect with players on a personal level. If Hammon was questioning the Liberty's choice, it raised serious doubts about whether ownership truly understood what they were doing. Hammon's defense also pulled back the curtain on a larger issue, the fragile state of coaching in the WNBA, by pointing out that Brondello was both a quality coach and a quality human being. Hammon underscored how rare it is to find someone who checks both boxes. Firing such a figure after a championship season, she implied, was not just reckless, but disrespectful to the profession. It sent a warning to every coach in the league. Even excellence isn't enough to protect you. Her comments also raised uncomfortable questions about Liberty management's priorities. Was this really about basketball, or was it about optics, control, and an obsession with chasing a perfect narrative? By calling the decision out, Hammon essentially put ownership on trial in the court of public opinion. Her words suggested that coaches across the league were watching and taking notes, realizing that their own jobs might never be as secure as they once thought. The reaction to Hammon's defense was swift. Fans and media figures amplified her words, using them as evidence that the Liberty had made a mistake. If someone of Hammon's stature believed Brondello had been wronged, then the firing could no longer be spun as a standard front office decision. It became a symbol of how even the most successful coaches could be discarded when they no longer fit a certain image. Perhaps the most damaging part for New York was what Hammon's defense revealed to players. If their coach could be undermined despite loyalty and success, then what did that say about their own security? Hammon's words didn't just defend Brondello, they exposed a deeper fracture between ownership and the very people they depend on to win games. But Hammon's stance was only one part of the storm. Behind the scenes, the Liberty were already looking at replacements, and the rumors swirling about their next hire painted an even more chaotic picture. With Sandy Brondello's abrupt dismissal, attention immediately shifted to one burning question: who could possibly replace her? The Liberty had just forced out the most successful coach in franchise history, someone who had proven she could manage superstars, navigate playoff pressure, and bring home a championship. Whoever stepped into that role would not just be inheriting a stacked roster, but also a fractured locker room and a fan base already skeptical of ownership's motives. And according to ESPN's reporting, the Liberty were not just thinking about WNBA candidates, they were eyeing names from the NBA. That rumor alone set the basketball world buzzing. The idea that New York's ownership might turn away from experienced WNBA leaders to chase an NBA coach suggested this firing was about more than results. It hinted at a desire for optics, a flashy, headline-grabbing hire that would elevate the Liberty brand, even if it alienated the people who had built the league. Analysts immediately raised concerns. Would NBA coaches, many of whom had never worked in the women's game, be able to manage the unique dynamics of a WNBA roster? More importantly, would Liberty players accept a leader brought in for clout rather than credibility? One of the biggest names floated was Dawn Staley, a coaching legend in college basketball. But as commentators pointed out, Staley has already reached a level of influence and financial security that the WNBA might not be able to match. She has built a dynasty at South Carolina, earns more than most WNBA coaches combined, and has little incentive to leave for a league where job security appears thinner than paper. That reality exposed another flaw in the Liberty's rumored strategy. They were chasing names that were unlikely to commit. Becky Hammon's name, too, was thrown into the mix, though she herself had already gone on record criticizing the firing. It would be difficult for the Liberty to convince someone who openly defended Brondello to take the very job created by her dismissal. And if Hammon declined, it would only further highlight the perception that the Liberty were making moves that even top coaches wanted no part of beyond those high-profile names. Whispers suggested that the front office might already have someone in mind, potentially an assistant, or an NBA figure waiting in the wings. But that only made the optics worse. If the decision to fire Brondello was less about performance and more about installing their person, then it meant the championship coach never stood a chance. No matter how much she won, this speculation painted the Liberty's choice as not just ruthless, but calculated. The firing wasn't simply about chasing another title. It was about reshaping the identity of the franchise to fit a vision only ownership believed in. But if that vision backfires, New York won't just lose games, they risk losing their superstars, their credibility, and perhaps the trust of an entire league watching closely. And if the locker room already felt betrayed by Brondello's firing, the next chapter could be even messier. Because the players themselves now had to decide, did they still believe in the Liberty? Or was it time to start looking for a way out? When news of Sandy Brondello's firing broke, the ripple effect inside the Liberty locker room was immediate. For most coaches, getting dismissed after a disappointing season is part of the business. But for Brondello, the situation was different. She had just delivered a championship and was universally respected by her players. That kind of bond doesn't vanish overnight, and removing her left many on the roster stunned, frustrated, and questioning the very foundation of their team. Breanna Stewart was among the first to make her feelings known. After their playoff exit, she had publicly declared, "We've got Sandy's back." Those words carried weight because Stewart is not only one of the league's biggest stars, but also a player who had chosen New York, in part because of Brondello's leadership. Her vocal support exposed the disconnect between the locker room and the front office. By ignoring Stewart's stance, Liberty ownership risked sending the wrong message to their superstar. her loyalty to the team didn't guarantee loyalty in return. Other players, like Sabrina Ionescu, may not have spoken out as directly, but their silence was telling. This is a group that had worked tirelessly under Brondello's system, trusted her strategies, and bought into her vision of building a dynasty. Removing her, without warning, shattered that sense of stability. Suddenly, players who thought they were part of a long-term plan were forced to confront the possibility that they too could be discarded the moment ownership deemed them replaceable. That uncertainty eats away at morale. In team sports, trust between players and management is essential. When a coach is fired, despite delivering results, it makes athletes wonder what truly matters. Is it chemistry? Is it championships? Or is it simply ownership's mood on a given day? Those questions don't just linger in the background, they affect how players train, how they interact, and how much they're willing to sacrifice for the franchise. The tension also raised concerns about free agency. Stewart's one-year deal suddenly looked more like leverage than commitment, with other expansion teams entering the league. She had options, and the Liberty's decision may have opened the door for her to explore them. If Stewart were to walk, it wouldn't just weaken the roster. It would unravel the very super team identity New York worked so hard to build, and she might not be alone. Players who watched Brondello's firing unfold would have every reason to wonder if the Liberty truly valued them as people, or only as pieces in a business machine. ESPN's coverage framed the move as championship, or bust, but in the locker room, it felt more like betrayal. Coaches come and go, but rarely do they leave behind a legacy of trust and belief, as Brondello did. Her sudden exit left players in limbo, trying to process how an organization could preach loyalty while practicing the opposite. And that's where the story takes a darker turn. Because ESPN's revelations didn't just highlight one questionable decision, they pointed toward a larger pattern. A dirty secret about how the WNBA handles its stars and leaders. When ESPN laid out the details of Sandy Brondello's firing, it quickly became clear that this was more than a coaching change. The network's coverage exposed the harsh reality behind the Liberty's decision, and in doing so, peeled back a layer of the WNBA that many fans had overlooked: the so-called championship or bust. Standard wasn't just an internal policy, it was a reflection of a deeper issue inside the league. Brondello's firing revealed the dirty secret. In the WNBA, loyalty and success don't guarantee security. Consider the facts. Brondello had taken the Liberty to back-to-back finals, won a championship, and built the winningest record in franchise history. In nearly every other professional league, such achievements would cement a coach's status as untouchable. Instead, New York treated her success as a baseline, then punished her the moment reality didn't match their dream scenario. That's not ambition, that's exploitation. It showed that even at the top, coaches and players are at the mercy of ownership agendas that often value control over consistency. ESPN's reporting highlighted that Brondello's job was in jeopardy, even before she lifted the championship trophy. If she hadn't won that season, she likely would have been fired a year earlier. That revelation shocked fans because it made the entire championship run feel like a trap. No matter what she did, her fate was already sealed. The dirty trick wasn't just the timing of the firing, it was the illusion of stability when, behind the scenes, ownership had already moved on. This is where the league's systemic problem comes into focus. The WNBA has long struggled with balancing growth against stability. Teams want to project power, attract stars, and market themselves as elite, but they often do so at the expense of the very people who helped them get there. Brondello's dismissal wasn't simply a Liberty issue. It was a warning to every coach and player in the league. If championships can't protect you, nothing can. The fallout extended beyond New York. Other franchises, watching closely, were forced to reckon with the precedent this set. If ownerships believe they can discard championship coaches without backlash, what does that mean for smaller market teams fighting to build credibility? It creates a culture where fear, not loyalty, drives decisions. Coaches operate knowing they are expendable, and players sign contracts with one foot already out the door. Becky Hammon's comments tied directly into this theme. By defending Brondello as both a coach and a person, Hammond indirectly exposed how rare it is for organizations to value both qualities. The Liberty didn't just fire a coach. They undermined the idea that success and character matter in the WNBA. ESPN's coverage amplified that reality, forcing fans to confront a truth that had been whispered for years. The league's biggest secret is that even at the highest levels, trust is an illusion, and that truth has consequences. Because once players and coaches realize that nothing they accomplish guarantees safety, the question becomes unavoidable. Why stay loyal to a system that refuses to stay loyal to you? The firing of Sandy Brondello is more than a Liberty headline. It's a turning point for the WNBA. By removing a coach who had achieved everything fans thought ownership wanted, the Liberty exposed cracks in the league's foundation. Those cracks are not just about one team's decision, they're about what kind of league the WNBA wants to be moving forward. At the heart of the issue is stability. In a league still fighting for mainstream recognition, consistency is invaluable. Coaches like Brondello, who deliver championships and foster trust in the locker room, are supposed to represent that stability. Instead, the Liberty showed that even those achievements can be brushed aside in pursuit of an ideal that feels impossible if championship or bust becomes the standard. The WNBA risks creating a culture where coaches never feel secure, no matter how much they accomplish. That insecurity doesn't stop with coaches. Players are watching closely, especially those on short-term deals. Breanna Stewart, Sabrina Ionescu, and others have already seen how quickly loyalty can be discarded. When the stars of the league realize their coaches can be cut loose at any moment, it naturally makes them question their own future. Why tie themselves long-term to a franchise that doesn't hesitate to uproot its leaders? In that way, the Liberty may have unintentionally made themselves less attractive to the very players they need to keep. The ripple effect could go beyond New York. Expansion franchises are on the horizon, and their ability to attract big names depends on how stable the league looks. If the message being sent is that success doesn't equal security, players may prefer to gamble on new markets rather than established ones that could shift the balance of power in unexpected ways, weakening teams that once seemed untouchable for fans. The firing reinforces long-standing frustrations about WNBA management. Supporters have argued for years that the league struggles with transparency, often leaving fans in the dark about why certain decisions are made. ESPN's expose gave the public a rare look behind the curtain, but it also confirmed the suspicion that ownership agendas, not performance, dictate the future of even the best coaches. That realization erodes trust, not just between teams and players, but between teams and their fan bases. And then there's the league's image on the national stage. The WNBA has been gaining momentum, largely thanks to increased visibility and new stars driving record ratings. But stories like this pull the conversation back to dysfunction. Instead of celebrating a championship run, the spotlight is on backroom politics, questionable standards, and instability. That hurts the league's credibility at a time when it needs to prove it can sustain growth. In the end, Brondello's firing forces the WNBA to confront an uncomfortable truth. Success alone isn't enough if ownership is more concerned with optics than loyalty. Unless the league finds a way to balance ambition with fairness, it risks alienating the very coaches and players who make it worth watching. And if that happens, the damage won't stop with the Liberty. It could reshape the future of the entire league. Sandy Brondello's sudden exit from the New York Liberty wasn't just a shocking headline, it was a wake-up call for the entire WNBA. ESPN's reporting exposed the ruthless championship or bust mindset driving ownership, a standard that punished even the most successful coach in franchise history. Becky Hammon's defense of Brondello underscored how deeply this decision cut, not only for players, but for coaches across the league who now see how fragile their positions really are. For the Liberty, the move risks more than short-term backlash. It threatens locker room unity, superstar loyalty, and the trust of fans who believed in the team's rise. More importantly, it shines a light on the league's biggest weakness, a system where loyalty is expendable, and even champions aren't safe. If the WNBA cannot balance ambition with stability, the consequences could reshape its future in ways ownership never intended.